history, apologetics, and more. We're making education, families, and America great again. Here's Ray.
Hey, welcome to Ray Moore Live on April 2nd, 2019. And we're continuing on with the need, the necessity, the urgency of promoting K-12 Christian schooling and homeschooling. And to move that idea along, we have a very important special guest today. We have had some excellent guests off and on these last 9 months, but today we have really a very special guest, a fairly new friend of mine, even though I have followed his career for a number of years. And it's Alex Newman. He's an award-winning journalist, educator, author, and consultant, and is a regular writer for a number of important conservative or Christian magazines, such as WorldNet Daily, Freedom Project, New American Magazine, Crisis Magazine, and others. And he's also written for local and regional dailies, magazines, and particularly in the conservative arena. And he's actually written for overseas journals and magazines as well. And we're going to get a little bit into his credentials in a minute, but I need to tell you how we came together and how we met. We have a mutual friend, and it's a longtime friend of mine, Pat Markham. And he is a homeschool consultant, and he and his wife were the founders of the very popular program some years ago called Homeschool Headquarters. What they did is they came up with a concept of putting homeschool materials in local Christian bookstores. Now, the need for that program has sort of gone away because of the way the internet works now, and people don't need to go to the local Christian bookstore to get their curriculum and materials. But he came up with that idea as sort of an intermediate way before the internet was so viable. And he's also a good thinker on how to advance and grow a homeschool movement, the homeschool world. He and I have worked together off and on for 20 years. And I knew of Alex Newman because I was reading his columns and had also read his book, Crimes of the Educators. We'll mention it in a minute. But Pat came to me with an idea. It was sort of extraordinary. He said, look, let's approach Alex Newman and see if we can get him. He seems to understand the crisis in education. He's one of the best writers and thinkers. And see if we can get him to write a little book or a pamphlet or something and push some of these ideas forward, primarily with an idea that Pat had of we're going to lose our constitutional freedoms if we do not exit the public school system and get back into Christian schools and homeschooling. So he sold me on the idea of approaching Alex, which was not a hard sell. And we met with him in Florida, I think about 2 years ago. Was it, Alex?
That was about 2 years ago, almost exactly.
2 years ago. And neither one of us had ever met you, but we didn't even know where you lived, and found out that you were near Jacksonville. And it was very convenient for us to make a trip to visit with you, and you received us very well. And we presented the ideas that we had, primarily originated with Pat, and it wasn't hard to bring me along because I shared so many of them anyway. So that's how we got started. Now tell us your side of the story.
Well, I appreciate the very kind introduction, Ray. Thank you so much. I'm flattered, actually. That's very nice. And so, yeah, you know, I think Ray gave a very good summary of how we met and who I am. Yeah, it was really nice. I just got an email out of the blue one day from Pat Markham, and he said, Alex, I have this huge idea, and I know you don't know me, but you need to listen to me. And so I said, okay, well, I called him and said, look, I have this master idea where we're going to get all the kids out of the schools, and then we're going to save America. And obviously I was intrigued. And so we set up a meeting, and Pat and Ray came down, and so we talked for a long while. And I had already been convinced for a long time about the need for children to get out of government brainwash camps. Actually, I co-wrote Crimes of the Educators. You might be able to see it behind me, with Dr. Sam Blumenfeld. And so, you know, I had a lot of opportunity. Actually, Sam passed away very shortly after the book was published. And so I ended up doing hundreds and hundreds of media interviews about education on television, on radio, national radio, local radio, whatever. And always when they would ask me, well, what do we need to do? I'd say, well, the first thing you need to do is get your kids out of the government brainwash camps. And then when Pat came along and Ray, they kind of convinced me of the need to take it one step further and organize this, because I saw that as kind of, you know, a side issue, maybe not the defining battle for the future of our republic and our freedoms. But when I talked to Ray and Pat, they really made me realize that this wasn't just, you know, a minor thing that parents have to protect their children. This was the crucial thing. Not just to protecting our children, obviously, but to rescuing our nation and our freedoms and our Constitution and our churches and all the rest of it. So I was sold pretty quickly. You know, I was already sold before they even came to sell. And when they came to sell, then, you know, it was a very, very easy sell. And we ended up deciding that we would work together. And fortunately, here we are. We got some other great men involved. We got Duke Pesta, we got Israel Wayne, and we produced this right here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Let me say that we saw Alex, Pat, and I sort of a celebrity, and I'm going to get a little bit more into his credentials because, frankly, I think he's one of the great talents. And you're just going to have to sit here and listen to this, Alex. I'm sorry.
I'm turning red. I'm embarrassed. Right?
But in our movement, I had felt for a couple of years in reading his material. When I read Crimes of Educators, I said, wow, because I had known Sam for many years. And frankly, he was one of the heroes for me because when I started the Exodus Mandate in '97, some of it was due to the fact that I had read some of his books, and his Public Education Necessary really helped shape my worldview. And I can't remember how many years ago that was. And Sam was one of the pioneers of this movement. And so I saw that Alex was co-writing with him. I said, this guy really does get it. So Pat Markham and I met with him for a couple of hours. And after that, we had subsequent meetings and consultations, but we came away just kind of wow. It was kind of on a wow moment. I said, wow, this guy really gets it, understands what we're trying to do, getting the kids out, but he is very positive toward our presentation about what should be next with a book or video series, or as it turned out, it ended up the vehicle was the New American Magazine. So I remember just feeling it was a very divine appointment, and that was about 2 years ago. All right, what happened next, Alex?
Yeah, we went back and forth for a long time. Pat, you know, has very strong opinions, and so we're trying to iron out exactly where we would go with this. Ended up being a little bit more complicated than I originally imagined, but you know, we tried different ideas. We put together outlines. You know, what are the crucial things we need to emphasize? Because there's really so much that could be said here. You could write an encyclopedia on this topic of education and how it connects with all these other important issues. You know, the UN, the globalism, the socialism, the humanism, the undermining of the family. You know, the education is kind of at the center of it all. And so we really had to be very selective about what we would talk about, what we would include. And so eventually we narrowed it down to kind of the key points. You know, we ended up deciding on a formula. And I think, Ray, you were really instrumental in making clear how important it was that we not just focus on the problems, because, you know, the problems are well known to a lot of pastors, a lot of Christians, a lot of conservatives. They know that the schools are a disaster. So we didn't want to just rehash the fact that the schools are a disaster. We all know that. And what we really wanted to do was then, you know, first of all, expose that to people who weren't familiar with it, but also include a lot of positive stuff. You know, what should education actually be? So we've got this one in here about, you know, Christian education and what God says about education by Israel Wayne, who actually wrote a book by that title. What does God have to say about education? And then also, you know, talking about the wonders of homeschooling and the myriad alternatives out there, like private schools, Christian schools, Freedom Project Academy that Dr. Duke Pesta is involved in, and I'm also involved with, you know, one of the alternatives. So that's kind of where we went next is, well, what is the right balance of negative information, which, you know, you can't write this without exposing what's going on in the schools. So we decided to talk about the sexualization, the dumbing down, the indoctrination, and kind of how the globalists have hijacked the educational system. You know, we bring in a lot of quotes from the United Nations, and then also, you know, on the other side, the wonders of the alternatives out there, like home education and private schools and Christian schools.
Right. I'm grateful that you allowed me to do an interview. Actually, I ended up writing it pretty substantially, and mine's on page 40 and 41 if you haven't read it yet. And of course, one of the reasons we're doing the program today, we want to let everybody know who Alex Newman is. And I think most of our people in the Exodus Mandate already know that, but that he is the principal mover and shaker behind this issue, the New American Magazine, the February 4th issue, called Rescuing Our Children. Put that up again, Jared, so we want to make sure that everybody knows to get that. All right, this is a very, very important issue. Let me say a little bit about it from my perspective. I've been working with the Exodus Mandate officially since 1997, so we've got 22 years history. We've produced a couple of movies. I helped with the indoctrination movie, Escaping Common Core. I've written a book called Let My Children Go. My wife and I co-authored a book called The Promise of Jonadab. We've had a number of articles, and we have a movement, a bona fide movement of a number of leaders and people who have written books, like Israel Wayne. Jay Jacino has written a good book on public school teachers, Christian public school teachers also leaving. So there's a substantial body of work, but we lacked really effective tools or weapons, things that will help push the message stronger into the culture. The probably most effective thing we had up to this point, Alex, would have been the indoctrination movie, and we think 3 or 4 million people have seen that. But this came along, and it's just about the right balance. 5 articles are about what's wrong and the harm that public schools are doing, and then 5 are positive articles. And it's very clear in the issue, in all the articles, that we need to get out of the system, out of the state-run public school system. That's repeated a number of times. There's no ambiguity, no uncertainty there. And so many, Alex has already mentioned, so many of the conservatives just whine and bellyache and complain about public education. But then they say, oh, I don't know what to do about it. I'm a conservative. I don't know. I don't have a plan. But this magazine is so clear. When I was involved in talking to Alex when it was being developed, along with Pat Markham, we were consulting with him, over the months before it was published. But when I got it in my hands and looked at it, I thought this might be the most important single tool we've had up to this moment in pushing this message deeper into the culture. Tell us, Alex, what you think the New American and the John Birch Society are going to do to help that happen too.
Well, the New American already has a very broad and diverse and interesting readership. In my estimation, the readers of the New American are probably the most active readership of any publication in terms of actually doing things with the information. People who read the New American are not just people who are just absorbing the information and then getting back to whatever they were doing before. These are people who are activists. These are people who are smart. These are people who are state legislators and local officials and involved in their local, political parties, and involved in, serving on boards and serving in public elected office, things like that. And so when something goes out through the New American, it really, obviously they don't write about it in the New York Times very often, but it really has a profound impact. And of course, the JBS, which is an affiliate of the New American, actually publishes the New American, has a national organization. And this idea in this special report actually fits so perfectly. The motto of the Birch Society is less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Now, one of the key things is we all recognize that government is essential, right? All Christians recognize that government is ordained by God for certain things, but it's not ordained for certain other things, right? The role of government is not to educate the children. The role of government is to punish evildoers and things like that. And unfortunately, the government has really overstepped its bounds here. So when we talk about less government, we don't mean no government. We mean government should be confined to the areas where it has a duty, where it has a legitimate responsibility. Education is not one of those. And education also threatens in every other area. You know, every program that the JBS works on, restoring our Constitution, rebuilding our moral foundations in America, you know, building a sense of personal responsibility in people, you know, trying to restrain government, trying to stop abortion, trying to protect our God-given rights, you know, our gun rights, our free speech rights, our religious liberty. All of these things are at risk if the government continues to brainwash the children in cooperation with the United Nations. So really, I see this as just a crucial extension of the the JBS is actually not a political organization. A lot of people don't realize that who aren't involved. It's an educational organization. The goal of the JBS is to educate the electorate. The JBS never supports political candidates, for example, even when they're members, right? The JBS, what they do is educate the opinion molders and educate the local community. And so what could be more important than the education of the upcoming generation, right? We're losing the upcoming generation. We can see the data. The young people are turning into socialists. The young people are leaving their churches. The young people are leaving the beliefs and the culture of their forefathers. And there is, you know, no other solution that doesn't involve the education of young people. And so the JBS has always recognized this. You know, they used to have the summer camps to try to help, you know, bring the children up to speed on Americanism and things like that. That eventually gave way to the Freedom Project Academy, you know, this online K through 12 school that Duke Pesta runs, who's one of the contributors to this special report. You know, went from something like 20 students when it started a few years ago to hundreds and hundreds of students in a dozen countries all over the world. You know, missionaries as soldiers have their kids there. It's just a phenomenal thing. And so with education at the core of everything that JBS does, and with the New American being one of their key educational tools, you know, it's a perfect fit. It worked out brilliantly. And, you know, Ray mentioned a divine appointment earlier. I think there's just been a series of divine appointments here. And I'm praying that God will use this special report to rescue children, to bring glory to himself, and to advance his kingdom.
What do you think? Let's discuss the prospects of what we could accomplish with it in the next year. Periodically, I think several times a year, New American will put out a special topical issue devoted just to one topic. And so it makes that particular issue, it's not really a news magazine, it's sort of timeless. And in the past, you had the issue, I think January of 2018, called The Deep State. And Alex happened to have written almost all those articles too. Like I said, we have before us today one of the 3 or 4 top conservative Christian-oriented journalists in the world, maybe. And excuse me for praising you so much, but
thanks, Ray.
I wouldn't lie. If it wasn't true, I would be silent. But so it's significant. He's done a great body of work. But besides the book Crimes of Educators, what's the prospects for this? We are praying and hoping with the Exodus Mandate and our affiliates that we could see 1 million copies of this magazine circulating throughout the culture in the next year. Is that realistic, Alex?
I think it is, Ray. You know, you and I have talked about, we're now on the 4th printing of the magazine. They're still flying off the shelves. We have people all over the country who've ordered 500 copies, 1,000 copies, and, you know, those are being distributed through ministries, through grassroots organizations. The response has really been phenomenal. And the JBS has reached 1 million copies of special reports before. Actually, back over a decade ago at this point, when they were pushing the, you know, when the Bush administration and later the Obama administration were pushing North American integration. You know, I don't even know if you remember all that, Ray, but they had that security and prosperity partnership.
I was circulating them.
Oh, see, well, there you go. So Ray's been in this fight for a long time, right? And so we got 1 million copies of that out. And actually you had a member of the Council on Foreign Relations who was the lead person on the North American agenda, Robert Passer, who passed away a few years ago. And he actually wrote in his book before he died that it was the John Birch Society and the Eagle Forum that derailed his agenda. And I think the fact that over 1 million copies of that special report were distributed was the determining factor. You know, the New York Times didn't write about it again. The Washington Compost didn't write about it, but These were magazines in the hands of local community leaders, state legislators, members of Congress, television hosts, businessmen. And so the power of that is just phenomenal. It's quiet, but it's enormous what it does. And so we've done it before. I think we can do it again. I think as I talk to people, I've done dozens and dozens of radio interviews and TV interviews and shows on this already. I'm going to do another one in as soon as I get off here, actually in about 8 minutes, Ray.
Okay.
And then several more throughout the rest of the week.
Well, let's move along then, because he's only got less than 10 minutes with us, and we can talk a little bit more about his credentials and some of the things that are going to happen after he leaves. He's got another appointment, and just can't help it, but we certainly can carry on. Tell me a little bit about your tour, because you're going to be doing a tour, and I want people to know about that. Yeah,
so that's another one of the exciting things here, and I've got a summer speaking tour where I'll be talking about this special report coming up. As there you see one of the flyers for it.
We have an event for him in Columbia.
Yep, and I think we've got 5 in South Carolina,
and 2 in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and so all up and down, the East Coast, and we'll be driving across the North. We've got stuff all over the country. Actually, I think we've booked something like 40 already in maybe 28, almost 30 states so far. Phenomenal response, and we've actually turned down dozens and dozens of opportunities because we couldn't make it fit in the schedule. It's just that hectic. So incredible response. We expect many hundreds of people at some of these events.
Almost a couple of thousand at some, I think.
Yeah. I'll be in California and in Canada in a couple weeks on April 27th, talking about this at the state convention for the Eagle Forum in Orange County. Before that, I'll be up in Vancouver, Canada, at a prophecy conference there. They expect well over 1,000 people. We'll be talking about the same thing, the deep state and the education. So the word is getting out. We're going to continue getting it out. I think this summer is really going to be a big thing. If you're in an area where we're going to have a stop, please make sure you come by. Please make sure you help us promote it, get the word out. But yeah, it's shaping up to be something really, really significant, I think, Ray. Not to toot my own horn, but I think we're going to be getting out a lot of copies of this. We're going to be educating a lot of pastors, a lot of moms and dads, a lot of influential people, business people. So this is a tremendous opportunity coming up, and hopefully we'll get a lot of kids out of the government school system. And the next part of Pat's plan was, as kids start leaving the schools in massive numbers, the world is going to have to pay attention to that, right? The establishment media, no matter how much they want to ignore us and pretend like we're not doing what we're doing, if a school district loses 5 or 10% of the population of its students, they're not going to be able to avoid talking about that and why that happened. And so that'll give us the opportunity to reach the last remaining holdouts. I think there's 6% of the people who still believe the media, so we can reach them. That's what we really need to do. And I think that was part of Pat's original vision, is we can't just reach the people we always reach, not preach to the choir. We need to reach everybody. And so we're on the way to that. We need to keep working. And Ray, you've really played a big part in making that happen. And a lot of the people on this program right now, and the people who will be watching it later, also have played a big part in that. We hope you'll continue helping us. It's for the children, not to sound cliche, but it really is.
Okay, we put up the schedule for the summer as we now have it. I think Jared has that. Just kind of posted to see the states he's going in. Now, this one shows his presentation in Columbia, South Carolina on the 22nd of May. We're expecting a couple of hundred for that at least.
Yeah, I've got a schedule in front of me. I can give you, it's a rough outline of the schedule, but I'll be in, let's see, Georgia, South Carolina.
You have it right there. Of it.
Okay.
Can you put it up, Jared? A printed copy of the schedule.
Yes, I'll be in Connecticut June 7th through June 9th, New Hampshire June 10th and 11th, Massachusetts, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Oregon, Washington State, California, Idaho, Texas, and on and on and on it goes.
Okay.
So
and he's going to be coming through the deep South. That would be Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama in August, early August. And we really have nothing scheduled there yet. He's going to be in Pensacola, Mobile. So if anybody is in that region and wants to talk to me, I can probably, we're still working on the schedule. He's got a big, powerful schedule of events in Virginia, I think starting the 25th of May. Alex, we only have a couple more minutes. Is there anything you want to say? We're going to continue to talk about you after you're gone.
Okay, that's why my ears will be burning, huh?
Yeah.
But no, well, hey, I so appreciate you, Ray. Thank you for everything you're doing. You know, this movement that you've kind of led and started, I think, is the most important possible agenda that we could be working on, and that is protecting our own children. And the really great thing about it is, you know, as Pat always said, we don't have to go change laws. We don't have to do this, that, and the other. We just got to get the kids out, right? That's the first and most important step, and everybody can play a part. So, you know, to borrow your metaphor, with the Dunkirk operation, you know, everybody who's listening to this, everybody who wants to save the country can get involved here. Maybe you can help with a scholarship. Maybe you can help, you know, your children get their children out. Maybe you can help distributing copies of the special report. There's a role for everybody, no matter how big, no matter how small. Everybody can do something. And so, Ray, I just hope that everybody listening here will keep helping us out on that. And just thank you guys all so much for the support and for the opportunity to work on this project.
I ask our audience to please pray for Alex and the magazine and the tour. He's going to be on the road about 4 months. And so, Alex, it's great to have you today, and we'll probably have you back. But we're going to continue on with the program after you're gone.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you so much, Ray. Thank you to the listeners. Really appreciate you guys, and we will be back in touch soon. Then.
Mention the magazine and the next show you're going to be doing.
I will do that. Thank you, Ray. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye. All right. Well, hey, one of the heroes in this is really, I said, our mutual friend, Pat Markham, because he's the one that originally came up with this idea, and he kind of brought me along, but it wasn't hard. I was already all in on it, and he and I have shared, like I said, for 20 years. We've been kind of laboring together in the homeschool vineyard, and Pat's kind of a big thinker type of a person. He spends a lot of time praying, thinking, reading, and I'm it's not that I'm not a big thinker, but I'm so busy with the day-to-day. So he kind of brought me along on this, and it's really paid off. Now, this is not the magazine wasn't the original format that we were looking at. We were looking at a book or a video series or something. But as it got down closer and closer, it looked like this was the best venue to utilize for putting this message out, at least in the short term. And because it was already a vehicle. And so we had to persuade the New American and the John Birch Society this was something that they could do. And honestly, we need to give a lot of kudos to Gary Benoit, Art Thompson, some of the leaders there at the New American and the John Birch Society, because they picked this mission up. And I'm going to predict right now that this might be one of the most important things they've ever done. I think the New American has been around as a publication since early 80s. I'm not quite sure. I think the John Birch Society started in the late 50s, early 60s. And they really came under vicious attack by the deep state and the globalist interests back in a day when nobody understood how that really worked. And they were slandered and libeled, and it was a real effort to try to damage them because they were exposing the deep state and the globalists before anybody else did or even understood it. Now it's sort of a routine thing. We got the president of the United States talking about the deep state and globalism. And it's really a kind of an amazing moment of history that we're in. So kudos to the New American and the John Birch Society for their willingness to take this project up. And it's made up, it's not an explicit confessionally Christian organization, but I would say predominantly they're Christians. There's a lot of Jews, Mormons, libertarians, others who are pro-Christian, but they may not be Bible-believing evangelical Christians as I am, but still they're allies in the fight for the sovereignty of the United States, for nationalism against globalism, for constitutional government, strict constitutional government. And so they deserve a lot of kudos. And so what we're doing, and I think I'm speaking for Alex and them as well, we, with the Exodus Mandate, are going to make this our major mission for at least a year. And that's a year from February 4th. The issue came out on February 4th. and it's already gone through 4 printings, which I think is pretty good even for them. So they're on a good trajectory right now to see hundreds of thousands and perhaps 1 million copies circulating in the culture in a year. Just like the Deep State issue of January of 2018, I think there's over 500,000 of that out in the culture. And it's timeless because it's not dated material. This magazine will work 5 years from now. Maybe there would need to be some updating, but it still will be relevant 5 years from now. And as I've said already, and we've already had a couple of programs on this, the beauty of it is that there are 5 articles exposing and explaining what's wrong with state education, the error of it, and the damage that it's doing today, and a lot of the history of how it evolved in a bad way. And then there are 5 articles that say what to do. And I've been around the conservative movement most of my life, and I've never seen a bunch of people who don't have any plans. They all most of them just whine and complain, whine and complain. Oh, ain't it awful? Oh, Mr. Liberal, please, please stop hurting my children. Well, get your children out of the schools. Let's don't be silly here. And they're not going to stop hurting your children. They've got a plan. The left knows exactly what they're doing. And you'd think Christians would wake up to that. There is a devil. Now, we know there's a God. God is greater than the devil, but the Bible says the devil operates like a roaring lion, prowling the earth, seeking someone to devour. And right now, he wants to devour your children if you have them in government schools. So don't be a fool about this. Get your kids out and stop the whining and complaining. If you want to defeat them, get your kids out. This is not rocket science. And, we got a problem today because the pastors don't warn their flocks. They don't care for the flocks. Now, we do know that some do, but only about 10% of our conservative pastors take a very aggressive stand on Christian education. And by that, I mean K-12, Christian schooling, and homeschooling. Another 20 to 25% are setting a good example by putting their own children in Christian schools or homeschooling, and they recommend Christian schools, but they don't actively preach on it and teach it to their flocks. So you'll see pastors that have, they themselves are homeschooling, but most of their members are in public school. That's got to change. And if you're in one of those kind of churches where you've got a pastor who is homeschooling his kids, I have them in Christian school, and yet he never addresses it in the congregation, you need to take him aside, my brother and my sister, and mildly rebuke him for that. Don't do it publicly or he might throw you out of the church, but you need to correct him. And we have some materials in the office that we could send you on that. We've got a pamphlet that I've written called Pastors Taking Cover, and it addresses this issue of the fearfulness of our pastors. You have any way of putting that up, Jared? Don't have it handy, it's okay. Okay, now we do have about a half hour to go. And since Alex had to leave early, we're going to take a little bit more time talking about his background and all, but I need people today to really interact with me on strategies and tactics to get the magazine into the hands of the people in the next year. And like I said, we're not going to just hit it this 1 or 2 weeks or a month. This is going to be the priority issue, agenda item of the Exodus mandate for at least a year, maybe 2 years. We're going to keep it on, and we've got to build momentum, and we've got to find distributors for this magazine. So we need you to order 50 or 100 copies wherever you are, but we need you to find distributors. Get people like yourself that will order 25, 50, or 100. I recruited 3 people yesterday to order 100 apiece. So I'm this is what I'm doing. And imagine the impact if 1 million of these are circulating this year and the hands of pastors and churches. It would be enormous. We think we could drive the growth of Christian schools and homeschooling up by a couple of million in a year or two, just based on the use of the magazine. All right, did you find it, Jared? Didn't find. Okay, that's all right. We'll let that go. We have that in the office. It's called Pastors Taking Cover, and a lot of you have had it, but please use that in your states. All right, let's see. Let's see if we can get a little commentary going. I see some really good people on today, and then maybe you'll get me off on another tangent if someone asks us a good question or makes a comment. I see that Pat Markham is on, and I don't know if he can join the conversation. I see Bob Dreyfus, Doug Petersma. I'm sure there are others here. And of course, know that the program can be looked at night on archive, and we need you to, send it out. Pat, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think I can, if you can hear me.
Yeah, there you go. All right, this is a man who kind of started us off on this new adventure, and I thank him several times for bringing it to my attention. I knew Alex Newman, but I had not thought of meeting with him, and Pat was the one that came up with that idea.
Yeah, if you're asking for comments, absolutely. Just was such a privilege and opportunity to, all of us get together as we did with Alex and have somebody, get on board as he's done. And of course, my overall view is always been that the government school has been systemic for basically all the things that have gone bad for our country, for Christianity, morally, spiritually, politically, and socially. And so until I think everybody recognizes that, or at least good Christians, conservatives, patriots, and recognize that this can't be reformed, it's impossible, then the problem will continue and we will lose everything that our founders intended us to have constitutionally, and certainly God as our creator, and now, with children giving an option. That has resulted in a lot of things that we now see. Of course, the issue of genderism and all that has ensued there. And then politically, we see the challenge with our Second Amendment rights and so many other things that had these generations of children not been brought up, indoctrinated in these things, we wouldn't be facing them today. And clearly, if we don't change and recognize that and find an alternative, then the end result is going to be America that we don't recognize anymore. And we are going to lose all our freedoms.
You can see these are things that Pat and I have held together for years, and there are others, but we pal around and talk about these things, and it's very sad to realize how so many people have tried to reform this system, and now people are waking up to the horror of it, and they leave their kids there. I mean, what's going to happen to your children if they're exposed to socialism and globalism and climate control, and they become brainwashed? You can't leave your kids there and complain. The public school people are not going to change. You've got to come to terms with that. And Pat and I have seen this and talked about it. And frankly, Pat, it's been frustrating at times to feel almost alone on seeing it.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah.
I got a question for both of you, okay. Pat and you. As you guys are older gentlemen, what is your advice or opinions to those grandparents who have grandchildren, and then using this magazine and then other tools? What can, I guess, what have we done, and then what can we do? What can the grandparents do to influence their children and their grandchildren? Any advice in that regard?
Let me answer that first. First of all, they need to. We're grandparents now. we homeschooled our children and then put them in Christian school when they got older. And now my kids are 48, 43, 40, and 36. And they are putting their kids in Christian school, and they did homeschool a while. So you've got to communicate to your children in a way that you've got to keep this chain going. We do see cases where people will homeschool their kids or put them in a Christian school, and then they will not homeschool or put their grandkids in Christian school. So you lose the momentum. So we've got to teach it in a way that the chain doesn't break. One thing that we see some grandparents doing, sometimes they help their children fund Christian schooling for the grandchildren. We see a misemphasis or a bad emphasis. Sometimes people say, well, I'm going to put funds into my grandchildren going for higher ed. You know, when they get to be college age, we'll help the children put them in college. Well, if you leave them in the public school, K through 12, they will already have been corrupted and ruined and destroyed. So it's no point in thinking about putting them in Christian higher ed if you leave them in pagan, godless, demonic K-12 education. So it's important to keep this vision alive and instruct your children, if they're young, and adults, that they've got to protect the grandchildren. So Pat, you may have something to say on that too.
Well, what I would add is this is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. This is our freedom issue. And I think everybody that understands that and then gets active, and I would say active in the sense of working with organizations, working with leaders, Christians, pastors behind the pulpit, sharing with others that, again, it's all systemic from the schools. We made a mistake a long time ago to ever hand our children over to learn the ways of the world, and then recognize that it is taught things that are contrary to the Constitution, and then work with the organization leaders like those that represent conservative values, such as John Birch Society and Eagle Forum and the National Rifle Association and FRC and American Family Association. And these are people that need to begin to understand and take a position that it can't be reformed. This was done with forethought and malice. It was planned long ago. All we're seeing is the results of that plan, that whole secular beginning, Horace Mann and everything that came out of Prussia. Be educated in that. Understand that this didn't happen by accident. It was done by design. And the United Nations is now in our classroom teaching their agendas to the children. And there's so much proof, so much evidence that all this is going on, that once that's brought before those kind of people that do care about our freedom, especially Christians, with the freedom to continue proclaiming the Word of God and and practice their faith, but conservatives as well, because we're all under that same flagship of what our intenders or what our founders intended for our freedoms, based on the very beginning of our Declaration, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, and that God is a creator. And with that in mind, and the Constitution that protects it, we all need to get active and recognize the schools are not doing what they should be or should have if they were going to be truly serving what the founders intended. And they should, not have the powers that they have. Yeah. And that's what the founders warned us against. We looked the other way, but now we need to recognize that and find an alternative.
I just see that my wife chimed in on, gave me a text, and I guess she's listening too, and so great for that. But she said, tell them that grandparents can homeschool too. And yeah, I had sort of slipped my mind. My sister, who's about 8 years younger than me, is helping homeschool her grandkids. And she's a real expert in homeschooling and a curriculum specialist. And So it can be a family endeavor. Now, sometimes some states have laws that the parents themselves have to do over 50% of it. But there are all kinds of things and programs, homeschool co-ops. But the most important thing, one of the most important things, and praise the Lord, the New American says it on every chapter, get the kids out now. Get the kids out now and get them into the safe sanctuary of Christian schooling or homeschooling. No matter what you do, get the kids out now. Quit dilly-dallying around and think that you can leave them there. They are being harmed. They're being brainwashed. They're being indoctrinated. And we know that about 80% of Christian children who are public school through their entire career are turning away from the church and the Christian faith. And we do know, and Pat has mentioned this already, if we don't do this as Christians and conservatives, we don't know the timetable, but it could be as short as 3 to 5 years, maybe a decade. We just don't know. We will lose our freedoms. We will lose liberty. We will become enslaved because of the public school system. It's the main tool that the enemy is using to enslave the population, because they're enslaving the minds and the hearts of children. And so the next generation that comes along, they don't even agree with their parents. 58% of millennials, that's the 18 to 34-year-olds, are self-described socialists. I mean, I knew a lady in Missouri years ago who was one of the big conservative school reformers. I mean, she fought Goals 2000 and globalism and outcome-based education and Common Core. She was a leader in the state of Missouri fighting these bad policies. She left her own children in the public school while she was saving the schools, which she couldn't do. She left her children in public schools while she was reforming socialistic public schools, which was impossible to accomplish. And she lost her own children. They became socialists and Marxists. And that story can be repeated 100 times. And we see so many pastors losing their children because they leave them in.
Ray, let me add to that.
Sure, go ahead.
You know, just a different perspective, and that is in the big picture, this is not about education at all. You know, homeschooling is a wonderful alternative, but anything other than the government school is what's necessary. This is an issue that has to do with freedom. Right. And it's everything that has gone and been used to go against God and country. And once that's recognized, you will see that it doesn't matter whether you have children in the system or not. It doesn't matter if you have children at all. You know, what's dragging our country down is that 80% that are allowing their children to be educated in those ways that are contrary to God, contrary to the Constitution. And that's why we need to join together, work with organizations and those that are in leadership positions to be aware of how serious this is. It's got us in the mess that we're in. Be honest with you, I don't know how we can even bail out, except that people really find anything that's an alternative that doesn't involve government and have our children educated in the truth. And with that, and even with that kind of agenda going forward, if we all work together, would draw the attention that's needed for even the media to have to begin to focus as to why people are leaving and the reason behind they're no longer allowing government to be in charge of educating America's youth.
Right. Good point. Let's before we want to talk about the magazine, how to get it. Jared, put the magazine back up, and we need to post a phone number they can call to order them, and post this phone number 800-342-6491. That needs to be on the screen. 342-6491. All right, and then also you could put www.shop, shopjbs.org. And that's how they can get the magazine. And I guess you got it up there. I don't see it, but I assume the viewers can see it. Now, what we're doing, yesterday, I recruited 3 people just on the phone that are part of my Exodus network in 3 different states. And they're going to order 100 copies each. And we know that hundreds of people have ordered. And it's not just the members of the John Birch Society, but they're homeschool families, other conservative groups. And so we've got a lot of synergy here, but it's critical that that people order the magazine, and we're not looking for you just to get them and give them out randomly. We want you to get them and prayerfully give them to pastors, Tea Party people, conservative, political people, but also to homeschool families and Christian school families. Now, why would you need to give them to them? They already got their kids out. They're doing the right thing. No, let me tell you why it's important. We estimate that up to 50% of families that are currently homeschooling and doing the right thing with their children, or 50% of families that are currently in Christian schools, could return the Pharaoh school system if their circumstances change in some way. They do not have deep, abiding convictions. And I'm not criticizing anybody. Praise the Lord, they at least got their kids out right now. But if they read this magazine, they will become inoculated against going back into the system. And we see it all the time. People they homeschool their kids up through 7th or 8th grade, and they say, oh, they're okay now, I'm going to put them in public high school. Well, that's when it gets really deadly. That's where they're getting transgender and Islam and LGBTQ. They start really bearing down on the corrupting indoctrination at the higher levels. And of course, they do it in lower levels too. So you've got to stay with it. And so those of you who get the magazine, try to give it to people who are doing the right thing. And then you need to recruit distributors. I need distributors. I need people that will commit to order 25 or 50 copies of the magazine and take 2 or 3 months, prayerfully give them out, and then reorder, reload, take 2 or 3 months and get rid of them, and then reload, reorder. I made 3 different orders of the deep state issue of this magazine last year. So we're not asking you just to hit it at one time. You make this your project for a year and maybe 2 years. We may stay with it for 2 years. We do not have the tools we need until this came along. This is a big tool. And I'm going to make a prediction that it will be 1 million copies, but you've got to get the homeschool and the Christian school people engaged. All right. Does everybody see the phone numbers? All right. If you're on the line today, take a pencil and pad and you write those phone numbers down right now. All right. All right. Let's see. Just a little bit more about Alex Newman. We didn't give all of his credentials. He's a graduate of the University of Florida in Gainesville in journalism. And he's written, of course, this important book, Crimes of the Educators. But he's written hundreds of articles. And I would guess he could have a 1 million or 2 regular readers around the world. And he's an international correspondent for New American. And he is travels all over the world. He's he's lived in 8 countries: U.S., Mexico, Brazil, Switzerland, France, South Africa, Spain, and Sweden. Now, why would that be the case? Well, he grew up as a child of a diplomat. And so he was educated in all these elite schools where a lot of the globalists send their children. And so he's seen that side of the world. And I don't know when he became a Christian and a conservative. I do know that his father, who is a retired diplomat, is very supportive of his work. So, there are some good people that serve in the diplomatic corps. I don't think his dad was an ambassador, but he was high up in the diplomatic service. And Alex is extremely bright, able man, high IQ guy, and we're just so grateful to God that He's raised him up. And Patty's only 33 years old.
Yeah, he's got a lot of years ahead of him.
Yeah, he's younger than my youngest child, and so I'm excited for this new generation that's coming along, that we look forward to a good future. All right, we see some other people on the program today. Time to hear from somebody else. Pat, I think we're going to be done here and see if Robert Dreyfus or some of these other people want to have something to say.
All right.
Unmute. Okay, the point is, help us out with the New American Magazine for the next year. And this is a history. Pat and I were the two men that brought it to Alex's attention. And as we came away from the meeting, the first meeting, weren't we kind of in a wow moment, Pat? Remember that? I said, wow, he really, I think this is, God may enable him or cause him to want to help us with this. And indeed he did. And they sold it to the New American Magazine, and they came forward with this issue. And when I looked at it the first time, when I had it in my hands, and Pat and I both had been consulting off and on with them during the 2 years that they put it together, I was stunned after seeing it, how really good it was and how good a tool it could be.
Ray, let's not forget two great quotes.
Okay.
And one of them is our great president, Abraham Lincoln. And, who said that the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. And the other, the infamous Hitler, who said, he who gains the youth controls the future. Right. They weren't lying, either one of them. Both have been proven true. Now we need to take our own responsibility as individuals and realize that we cannot continue this and expect to retain our freedom in America.
Right. That's a good conclusion. And we believe that it's even possible that if the church and the conservative movement would stand up and do the right thing on this, we could actually defeat them and see a blossoming of our culture and a renewal of our Christian values and Western conservative values in the future. So this is a winning strategy. Okay, thank you for being on today, and I'm going to close in prayer. And please, you can send this out, raymorelive.com, the April 2nd program. You can forward it to your social media network and have them look at it. And of course, they can go back and look at the archives. You go to the upper right column, the button archive, and you can look at a lot of the old programs.
Live.com, the April 2nd program.
Okay, I'm going to close in prayer. Father God, we thank you for our brother Alex Newman and for his service and for his talent. And we thank you for him getting New American to put this special issue out. And he himself wrote half the articles. We thank you for Duke Peston, Israel Wayne contributing. Thank you. We bless you for that. And we pray you to prosper it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
This is my story, and I'm sticking with it.